Thank you for listening to the Conformed to Christ podcast, where we seek to engage the mind, affect the heart, and call people to follow Christ. I'm Jay Jones, and I'm here with a text-driven Tuesday with George Mays. George, it is such a sleepy day.
It is, yeah. Oh, yeah. No, I was telling you before we started, this is going to be the NPR version of the podcast.
Thank you for listening today to the Conformed to Christ podcast. Today we're talking Melchizedekian priesthoods. Yeah,
Exactly.
it's all rainy and dark, and
Yeah.
I don't think either one of us got a good night's sleep. So we'll try to let you be energized by the text. How about that?
I didn't get my coffee this morning.
Oh no! Let me go make you a cup real quick.
No, it's all right. It's all right.
I can throw you a softball question and get you talking and run out and go make a cup of coffee and be back by the time you're done.
No, it's all right.
Okay.
With how tired I am this morning, I'm afraid I'd run out of things to say before you got back.
Oh man. Well, if you're here for Text Driven Tuesday, thanks for coming back. We are at Hebrews chapter 7, and we're talking about everyone's favorite old school priest, Melchizedek.
Yeah, we're getting into it. Well, I don't know how familiar people are with the story of Melchizedek.
No, they're not.
His name has popped up
several times
in chapter 5, chapter 6, and now he's actually going to get into it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So here's what I think would be good. Let's have you read the text, and then I think it would be really beneficial for the people listening. Tell the story of Genesis chapter 14. Okay. I liked how you did that. You just kind of told the story. Hey, here's these kings, but I want you to really Lord of the Rings it up for us because we're tired.
Right.
Okay, tell us the story of the Battle of the Plains.
All right,
that's what I'll call it.
The Battle of the Plains.
Yeah.
Okay.
But first, you got to read chapter 7 of
I'll
Hebrews.
I'll read it off the screen.
Okay.
Okay, we're reading Hebrews chapter 7, verses 1 through 10. It says, "For this Melchizedek, king of Salem, priest of the Most High God, met Abraham returning from the slaughter of the kings and blessed him. And to him Abraham apportioned a 10th part of everything. He is first, by translation of his name, King of Righteousness. And then he is also King of Salem, that is, King of Peace. He is without father or mother or genealogy, having neither beginning of days nor end of life, but resembling the Son of God, he continues a priest forever. See how great this man was, to whom Abraham the patriarch gave a 10th of the spoils. And those descendants of Levi who receive the priestly office have a commandment in the law to take tithes from the people, that is, from their brothers, though these also are descended from Abraham. But this man, who does not have his descent from them, received tithes from Abraham and blessed him who had the promises. It is beyond dispute that the inferior is blessed by the superior."
There we go. Scroll up.
"In the one case, tithes are received by mortal men, but in the other case, by one of whom it is testified that he lives. One might even say that Levi himself, who receives tithes, paid tithes through Abraham, for he was still in the loins of his ancestor when Melchizedek met him." You were really testing me there, weren't you?
I was touching the corner and it wasn't scrolling. I was like, what's going on? Because I was touching too far over in the corner.
Yeah.
So, all right. Well, you have kind of three points. There's the point of the story in general, which I think it'll be helpful if you just tell us the story. Because we're like, people probably, who is Melchizedek? And then the main kind of body was 5 ways Melchizedek points us to Jesus. And then the third point, you put it all together. So let's jump into the story first and just kind of tell the story.
Okay.
Like we read, like if you just start reading your Bible as a new Christian and you just start in the New Testament, you're going to be like, who is Melchizedek?
Yeah, right.
Like, who is this person?
Yeah, he was. This story was. It was important to Jewish theologians. They were discussing this story in their writings before the New Testament. But we don't know this story very well.
Right.
It's tucked. You got Genesis 12 where God first calls Abram. You got chapter 15 where God promises Abraham, Abram, your descendants will be like the stars of the sky. Abraham believes God, and it's counted to him as righteousness. You got these big stories, and then in the middle, you've got this story that has a bunch of hard names. It's not really that, like, what's the importance of this? Why is this included? Is it just historical facts? Is it just entertainment? What's going on? And so we just kind of forget it. Melchizedek, he only shows up for 3 verses.
Yeah.
So it's I think that we often, my intro was like highway hypnosis. You ever had highway hypnosis, Jay? You're just driving and you just kind of zone out and you arrive at your destination. You're like,
you're like 30
like 2 hours.
Yeah. Here I am.
Right. And we do that. We do that when we read also. There's been plenty of times that I've been reading a book and I stop and I think, I've been reading for like 20 minutes and I have no idea what I've been reading. You go through the motions but your mind is just gone. I think we do that with the Bible also. And I think that this is a good test case for that. So you read it. You read it yesterday for our scripture reading. You did a good job.
Thank
There's
you.
a lot of hard names in here.
There's a lot.
Yeah. If what's difficult is I looked at several Genesis commentaries and they're not really sure who these people were. Like they don't have, like, some of the kings in here there's other historical records that help to kind of fill in the blanks. They're not really sure who these guys are.
It's because Abraham wiped them out.
That's probably true. He chased them away. Yeah, they're all gone. So we'll walk through. So this is in Genesis 14. So it's helpful before you read Genesis or Hebrews 7. It's good if you go back and you read Genesis 14, because the author of Hebrews in verses 1 and 2, he just assumes that his audience knows the story. So if you don't know the story, go back and read it. So we'll walk through it.
Okay.
All right. So before we get to Genesis 14, we have to remember Genesis 13. This is where Abram and Lot, they have to separate.
Yeah.
Their herds have become too large. They can't stay in the same place. So Abram tells Lot, you pick out wherever you want in the land. You go in the direction that you want to go, and I'll go in the opposite direction. So Lot looks out over the southern area of the land of Canaan. This would be south of the Dead Sea, and he sees that it's like the garden of the Lord. So it's like Eden. So he goes that direction. Abraham turns and he goes the other direction. So that's where we'll find them in Genesis 14. Lot is in the south. Abram he's up towards Bethany, which is, I believe, a little bit outside of Jerusalem. The problem is that Lot decides that he's going to go and live by Sodom.
Yeah.
So that's going to play into Genesis chapter 14. All right, so we don't know how long after these events of chapter 13, but in chapter 14, we're introduced to 4 kings. And they're given in, it's interesting, they're given in alphabetical order. But Chedorlaomer, he is the head of this coalition.
He has the one ring.
I guess so. I mean, he's the top guy, the top dog. He is king of Elam, which is it's on the east side of the Persian Gulf. It's in Iraq, and he's got 3 kings that are his allies. Okay, and they're kind of spread out. So this is kind of this big. I don't know if you'd call it an empire, but it's a large area. I think some of them are down to the south in like Saudi Arabia, and some are a little to the north. They have infiltrated into Canaan, and they have made 5 kings in the southern area their vassals. So they have to pay tribute to them. So you've got the king of Sodom, Gomorrah. You've got the king of Admah, Zeboim, and Bela, which is
tribute.
later called Zoar, which is where Lot flees in chapter 19. Anyway, so for 12 years... Chedorlaomer and his 3 allies, these 4 kings, have forced these 5 kings to pay tribute. In the 13th year, they've had enough, and so they rebel. So Chedorlaomer and his three allies, they form this army, and I imagine that they would go through Mesopotamia, the Fertile Crescent,
Yeah.
and go
Down.
down. So they'd start in the north of Canaan, they'd head south. And on the way, they're just stomping everybody in their path. And there's more names. There's more hard names. And people, they probably just skip over these names. But the names are important because it really highlights how powerful Chedorlaomer is. So it says he defeated the Rephaim, the Zuzim, the Emim, and the Horites. And people read those and are like, I have no idea. And we're usually not very good students of the Bible, so we just keep going. We don't stop and think, oh, who are these people? It's believed that all four of these people groups are giants. The Rephaim are definitely giants. The Zuzim and the Emim they're thought to have been giants. And the Horites, it's not quite as certain, but they're usually, in stuff I've read, they're usually all clumped together. So Chedorlaomer and his army they're giant killers. So they're going through the land of Canaan, killing giants. So they're a formidable army, right? These are not the guys that you want to mess with. But the kings of the south, they do their math. We're 5, there's 4, we've got more, so they go out to fight. It says that they go out to the valley of Siddim, and it's filled with tar pits. And I don't know, like, we're not given all the the details, but they're falling into the tar pits.
Yeah.
And so Chedorlaomer and his giant killing army, they defeat these 5 kings of the south, and they carry away the spoils of war, including Lot, who lives outside of the city of Sodom. So they carry them off. A survivor shows up at Abram's home. Abram is he's outside the oaks of Mamre, and he probably goes to Abram because Abram is he's probably famous, he's probably powerful, he's probably rich. I think we often have this picture of Abram and Sarai in a couple of tents, and they're just by themselves. There might be like a servant, but we're told that Abram has 318 trained men, so he's got a bunch of servants. He's a powerful man, and he has his own allies. He's got Mamre, he's got Eshcol, and he's got Aner. And so they gather up their forces, and they go after Chedorlaomer. So again, it's you've got another battle, and this time Abram defeats Chedorlaomer, and he actually chases him north out of the Promised Land, actually north of Damascus, which is in Syria. He gets all the spoils, including Lot, and he brings them back south. And then we get to the passage that is most important for Hebrews chapter 7, which is he comes back to the valley of Shaveh, which is called the King's Valley. And all of my studies show that this is outside of Salem. And Psalm 72, verse 6, identifies Salem as Jerusalem. So Jerusalem is, I think I got that wrong. 76 verse 2. Psalm 76 verse 2. So they go to this valley outside of Salem or Jerusalem. This would have been to the east of Jerusalem. So this is the valley between Jerusalem and the Mount of Olives, if you're thinking in New Testament terms. And 2 kings come out to meet him, the king of Sodom and the king of Salem, Melchizedek. The king of Sodom, he tells Abram, give me the people back. You can have everything else. But Abram says, I've taken a vow, and I will not take anything from you, lest you boast that you have made Abram rich. And this would have indebted Abram to the king of Sodom. Now, if the king of Sodom wants something from Abram, he can say, don't you remember all the stuff I gave you? So right. Abram's not gonna be indebted to any of these Gentile kings. Melchizedek, on the other hand, he brings out bread and wine. A lot was made of that in the early church. A lot of allegory about communion, but that's not picked up by the author of Hebrews at all. He just skips over that. So it's probably he brings out bread and wine to refresh Abram after he's gone to war.
Right.
So it's probably not like a sacrifice meal. It's probably just you're hungry and thirsty. Here, I'll feed you. And he blesses Abram, in the name of God Most High, he acknowledges that God is the one who has delivered Abram's enemies into his hand. And on the other side, Abram gives Melchizedek a tithe, a tenth of what he has. And that's it.
That's it.
That's all we get. That's all we get from Melchizedek until Psalm 110, verse 4, where David, he's writing about a king priest, which is what Melchizedek was. He writes, "The Lord has sworn and will not change his mind. You are a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek." So David is thinking upon this king priest from Salem. David, who just happens to be king of Salem, and he's received promises of a future king. He is prophesying about a future priest, a king priest of Jerusalem, who will rule in the order of Melchizedek
forever.
So he's picking up on this. So you see from Genesis to Psalm 110 to Hebrews, this interconnected story.
So now Hebrews picks up on that background, and of course it's mentioned in Psalm 110, like you just said. So we'll jump into the passage itself, and you had 5 ways Melchizedek points to Jesus. Number 1, you said his name points to Jesus.
I think it's important for us to understand what he's doing. So the author of Hebrews, we've already seen this. He's shown that Jesus is greater than the angels. He's greater than Moses. He's greater than Joshua. Now he's, from chapter 5 to chapter 10, he's showing how Jesus is better than the Levitical priest, and he'll get into how Jesus is better than the sacrifices.
Well, because that's what their the threat is, to run back to the Levitical priesthood. So he's going to show Jesus is better than Levitical priesthood.
So he's showing how all of these things in the Old Testament are anticipating Jesus, but Jesus is the fulfillment of them. It's typology.
Yeah.
So Moses, Joshua, the priests, they're all types of Jesus. Jesus is the fulfillment, and he's doing the same thing with Melchizedek. So Melchizedek is a real historical figure. The events of Genesis 14 actually happened, but in God's sovereignty over history, these things happened exactly as God wanted them to, in order to point to Jesus. And Moses writes under the inspiration of the Spirit exactly what God wants him to write. He doesn't write one word more, and he doesn't write one word less. And that's important for one of the points that he's going to make here in Hebrews chapter 7. He's looking at, he's taking the scripture as is, and he's believing this is inspired by God. Moses wrote exactly how he was supposed to, and he's actually going to take how Moses wrote this story to make one of his biggest points.
All right. So the first way that Melchizedek points to Christ is his name.
Yep.
King of righteousness.
That's right.
King of righteousness,
Yeah.
which is what his name means.
Right. It's his
Melech.
name. His name consists of 2 Hebrew words.
Melech and Zedek.
Zedek. Yep. Righteousness.
Melchizedek.
Yep.
King of righteousness.
Yeah.
All right. So how does this, in a way, foreshadow and Christ as one who is of a order of Melchizedek, but greater?
Well, you've got Melchizedek, who's the king of righteousness, or he's the righteous king. And already in Hebrews, going back to the beginning of Hebrews chapter 1, the author quotes from Psalm 45 about Christ, about the Son. It says, "Your throne, O God, is forever and ever. The scepter of uprightness is the scepter of your kingdom. You have loved righteousness and hated wickedness. Therefore, God, your God, has anointed you with the oil of gladness beyond your companions." So the Messiah is said to be this king who loves righteousness. This is found in Isaiah chapter 9. It's found in the Psalms. It's this king that is anticipated in the Old Testament is a king who loves righteousness. So he's even better because Melchizedek, he is, even though he's called king of righteousness, he's still just a man. He's still a sinner. Jesus is the one who perfectly loves and obeys God's law. He is the one who is perfect righteousness. He's perfect obedience. He loves righteousness. But not only that, we read in Jeremiah chapter 23 that this king who's coming, he actually is going to be called the Lord is our righteousness.
Yeah. Jeremiah 23, 5 through 6, which in the passage, speaking about all of the wicked rulers and shepherds, these shepherds of Israel, but then God promises that he's going to send his prince. And it's interesting when you look in there, it's like the text is interchangeable with God himself, and then he mentions this here, that he's the righteous branch of David, and then he calls him, the name by which he will be called is the Lord. The Lord is our righteousness.
Which is really interesting, that title branch. It's used in Jeremiah. It's also used in Zechariah. The branch is going to come. And the branch in Zechariah is this person in which the office of king and priest come together.
Yeah.
So a king priest who's called the branch. And he not only is righteousness, but we're sinners. The only way that we can be justified is not through our own works, but the Lord, who is our righteousness, the branch, he is going to fulfill the law, and then we're going to be clothed in his righteousness. So he is the true king of righteousness, who gives to his people righteousness.
Yep. So then the second way he points to us is the location. So he's the king of Salem, or king of peace. So
that's shalom.
Salem, shalom.
Yeah,
it's like an English transliteration, I guess, of shalom.
Yeah,
Salem.
I guess so. Yeah, Salem, Jerusalem.
Yeah.
I was looking up what Jerusalem means, and there are a lot of different interpretations of what Jerusalem
What'd you
means.
find?
Place of peace, like city of peace. I think that's the majority interpretation.
Okay.
It's the city of peace. Place of awe. Shalom doesn't just mean peace; it can also mean like completeness, wholeness. So there's translations of it that kind of go along those lines. But I think place of peace or city of peace is the traditional interpretation of the name. But it's picking up Salem, which is where Melchizedek was king. He was king of Salem, king of peace.
And of course, we know as Christians,
which is interesting because you've got all these kings. You got 9 kings that are at war in Genesis 14, and you got one king who isn't. He's not listed. He doesn't appear to have had any role in the fight.
Yeah.
He comes out afterwards. He's the king of peace. It's interesting. He's a unique figure.
It is
in the story. But of course, he's pointing forward to Jesus, who is the Prince of Peace.
Prince of Peace, yeah. And Ephesians 2, he is our peace, right?
He is our peace, right? Yeah, he has made peace between us and God through his cross. So he's not just a peaceful king; he's a king who actually brings peace.
Yeah.
Melchizedek, he can't bring peace, right? It's not his role to bring peace between the kings in the south and Kedorlaomer. There's still hostility. But Jesus, he actually accomplishes true peace.
Right. Peace between God and man, and can bring peace on this horizontal plane as well. And he ultimately will, in total fulfillment of when the story of history comes to its completed end. There will be nothing but peace. So we'll see him as then the fulfillment of all of that.
Right.
The third way Melchizedek points us to Christ is by his perpetuity.
I just wanted to use that word, Jay. I just wanted to use that word.
You used it. Perpetuity. And then you said
his foreverness.
His forever. Did you make a word up?
His foreverness.
His foreverness.
Foreverness. Yeah, that probably is a made-up word. I'm sure I'm not the first person to use that.
Into perpetuity.
Right.
Into forever.
He continues.
He continues forever. Okay, you have to explain this to us.
Right.
So you said at this point, when you were doing your research, you found some interesting things about who is Melchizedek, because even when you look at the passage here, it seems to be implying that he has some type of forever quality
Right.
to him.
Yeah.
The author of Hebrews does. And so you said, okay.
Verse 3 is challenging.
Is this a Christophany?
Mm-hmm.
That's what people think. And by that, what that word means is an appearance of Christ in the Old Testament.
Right.
So we have several of these. The angel of the Lord appears, and then all of a sudden we see the angel of the Lord is actually Yahweh in the flesh, appearing as a man talking to Abraham.
Right.
There are several of these occurrences, and you said you don't think it is, and you gave 4 reasons why you don't think it is.
It seems, from all the commentaries I read, I didn't run across. They were in the footnotes. Almost every commentary I read said there are people that think this is a Christophany, and they'd cite them in the footnotes. But none of the commentaries I had were arguing for that.
Okay.
Even Calvin's not arguing for Christophany. He's arguing Melchizedek is a man pointing forward to Jesus.
Okay.
I don't know if it's a more modern interpretation to see him as a Christophany. I've run across people that are really adamant, like, you're saying he's not a Christophany? Like, they're offended by it. And yeah, I'm looking for Christophanies all over the place in the Old Testament.
Right.
But I don't think that Melchizedek is a Christophany. I think he's actually just a man.
Yeah.
Now he's a man that is that God has intended to point towards Christ. He's meant to be a type, but I don't think that doesn't mean that he has to be Christ in the Old Testament.
Yeah.
So I gave 4 reasons. The first is the language is he resembles the Son of God. That word could be translated as he's similar or he's compared to the Son of God. It seems as if the flow of the argument would kind of be lost if he was just saying, look, Melchizedek was the Son of God. Now the Son of God has come.
Yeah.
In the likeness or resembling it's really weird. That alone for me makes me kind of stop. Like, what is he arguing here? He's not trying to argue that Melchizedek is the Son of God. He's arguing that he resembles the Son of God. So just the language of that verse, you drop down
Which
to
verse in particular, if they're following along?
Verse 3. Verse 3. He is without father or mother or genealogy, having neither beginning of days nor end of life, but resembling the Son of God. He continues a priest forever. You drop down to verse 15, and it's reversed. That another priest arises in the likeness of Melchizedek. So Melchizedek resembles the Son of God. The Son of God is in the likeness of Melchizedek. Right. So it goes both ways.
You don't really need the other 3 reasons, I don't think.
Well,
that one seems pretty good.
It seems pretty obvious that's what's going on, but there's others, I think. And that's not even the one that I
think the timeline one is pretty good too. Jesus, he has a priesthood that begins at a certain point.
He's designated a priest after the order of Melchizedek. He becomes the great high priest. That's pretty obvious in chapter 2. It says that therefore he had to be made like his brothers in every respect. That's verse 17, so that he might become a merciful and faithful high priest in the service of God to make propitiation for the sins of the people. So the argument of Hebrews is that Jesus, in his incarnation, being made like his brothers, and through his death, resurrection, and ascension, that's what qualifies him to be the high priest. So he wasn't. I know it can be kind of jarring for people, so I want to make sure that I say it in the right way. Jesus hasn't always been the high priest for his people. In his incarnation, he became the high priest.
Right.
And this is seen all over the place because
because he hasn't.
has to sympathize with them. He doesn't sympathize with them until his incarnation.
Well, because he hasn't always been a man.
He hasn't always been a man.
Right.
Right. The incarnation is
It's-
it is a singular, unique
Yes.
event that is important. Like
Uh-huh.
it's not just a side doctrine. It's vitally important
If
for
you really want
Jesus's
to blow
office.
their minds, you can tell them he hasn't always had the name Jesus either.
That's right. That's right. I gotten in the fights with people over that too.
Really?
Oh yeah.
It seems like an obvious one.
Yeah.
Hey, name him Jesus. That's
Right.
when he got his name.
Yeah. Well, anyway, the things that we fight over, but it seems like the timeline of his priesthood, it's necessary that he actually takes upon himself humanity before he can be the high priest. And so he couldn't be the high priest in Genesis 14 because he's not incarnated yet. So that also seems to be an argument against it. I think the next one is equally as strong. Melchizedek was an established political figure.
Mm-hmm.
Like this is a real account. Genesis 14 actually happened. Melchizedek was actually the king of a real place. Every other appearance of the angel of the Lord in the Old Testament it's pretty momentary. He shows up, he delivers a message, and then he disappears.
Mm-hmm.
So if Melchizedek is a Christophany, it's unique in all of the Old Testament because when did he show up? When did he leave? How did he become the king?
Right.
There's a lot of questions that arise out of that because he actually was the king of Salem.
Mm-hmm.
I suppose he could just show up as the angel of the Lord and they make him king immediately, and he goes out to see Abraham and he goes back and he says, thanks,
Right.
and leaves. I don't know. It seems more likely that Melchizedek was actually a man, maybe born in Salem, and his father was king, or I don't know. It just seems that that's more likely.
Okay.
But then I think the linchpin to it is that the author of Hebrews, he's reading the book of Genesis as Moses wrote it.
Mm-hmm. So this is number 4?
Yeah. So he's arguing from the structure of the book of Genesis. And I think we often forget that. We overlook the fact that these authors, it's not just haphazard. It's not just stream of conscious writing. They have intention behind this. So the book of Genesis, it's structured around 10 toledot statements. Toledot is the phrase, these are the genealogies of.
Mm-hmm. In Hebrew.
And you see this
Right.
10 times in the book of Genesis. There, before major sections, these are the generations of Noah or Abraham or Isaac or Jacob, or even Esau. Esau is given a genealogy, a toledot. All the major figures of Genesis, they have a genealogy. We know where they came from. We know who their children are. And then there comes this one guy who appears for 3 verses and he disappears. He doesn't have a genealogy. In a book that's structured around genealogies, this guy who doesn't have one and seems to be an important figure, as he's gonna continue drawing out how important Melchizedek is. He's not just like the king of Sodom also doesn't have a genealogy, but he's not an important figure.
Right.
Melchizedek is an important figure. He's only given 3 verses, but the things that happen in those 3 verses are so monumental that the author of Hebrews says this is unheard of, that he doesn't have a genealogy in this book. So he's not, when he says without father or mother, without genealogy, without beginning of life or end of life, he's not saying that Melchizedek didn't have those things. He's saying Moses didn't write those things. And so he's seeing not just what Moses writes, but what Moses doesn't write is all part of God's inspiration.
Okay.
That Moses's restraint is just as inspired as what Moses actually puts on the paper.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we need to understand
Sorry,
that also.
is
So so when we're talking about inspiration, we're talking the very words that were written were inspired by the Spirit. And if the writer didn't write those things, they're as good as they didn't happen.
Right. I see.
Not to say that they didn't happen, not to say that Melchizedek is still wandering around somewhere or sitting in a cave somewhere. I think he had a birthday and he died. But they're not recorded, and so there's a theological importance to Moses not writing about those things.
Okay. I see. All right.
Because he's prefiguring Christ, who in his eternality doesn't have a beginning, and he lives forever. But the main point is that Jesus's priesthood is not dependent upon a genealogy.
I see, yeah.
So the Levitical priest, their office, their function, it is connected intimately to their genealogy. They have to be able to trace their line back to Levi. If they can't, then they can't serve as priests. We see this in Ezra and Nehemiah. After they come back from exile, there are priests that they can't prove their lineage, and so they're barred from serving in the temple. On the other hand, Jesus, his priesthood is not bound to the genealogy of Levi. So he's going to keep it, this is kind of the setup for what's going to go on in the rest of chapter 7 and chapter 8, that Jesus is not he's not under the law. He doesn't serve as a priest under the law. Under the law, the priests have to be from Levi. But Jesus's priesthood is greater because it's not connected to Levi.
Right.
His priesthood, as it says in verse 16, it's not on the basis of a legal requirement concerning bodily descent, his genealogy, but it's based on the power of an indestructible life. So Melchizedek doesn't have a genealogy recorded. It's like he lives forever. Jesus, he actually does live forever.
Yeah,
he actually does have an indestructible life. Interesting. I didn't bring this up because we might get into it. I didn't want to. It already was kind of packed and kind of heady, and I didn't want to bring in Greek into it. But when it says that Melchizedek continues a priest forever, it's different words than over in chapter 7, verse 24, where it says Jesus continues forever. It's different language. So in verse 3, it could be translated literally as he continues a priest without interruption. Jesus, when it says he continues forever, it actually means unto the ages.
I see.
So even the Greek language is different.
Okay.
It just is kind of masked behind English, but the Greek words are different. So I think there's something there.
Okay, let's get into this fourth way. Fourth way that he points us forward to Jesus is by the honor he received. And it is interesting to think through this, think about it, that Abraham pays a tithe to this king.
Yeah.
There's no commands to tithe yet. And Abraham gives a tenth of everything that he has to this priest king.
Right.
We aren't really told why he did it, but I think what you're able to pick up on is the one who receives the tithe would be the person who is of higher honor.
Right. Yeah.
Which is crazy to think about because it's Abraham.
Yeah, it's Abraham.
And Abraham is like the dude.
He's called the patriarch here.
I mean, he is like, it's like Moses and Abraham. Who's the greater? I don't know. I mean, theological debates and wars, but like he's the guy. It's Abraham. We have Abraham as our father. This is what they say in the New Testament. And he's paying
He's
tithe
the father.
to
He's called a prophet. He's called the friend of God. All of these titles, they exalt
We would
Abraham.
think Melchizedek should pay tithes to Abraham.
Right.
But that goes the other way.
Yeah. One commentator brought it out that Abraham, by doing this, he essentially makes Melchizedek his priest. He recognizes, and again, we don't have all the details. Does Does Abraham know who Melchizedek is? Maybe. I don't know. But he recognizes that Melchizedek is a priest to the same God that Abram worships.
Uh-huh.
And so he pays a tithe to him, essentially saying, "You're my priest," which is it's pretty mind-boggling. I mean, it's again these three verses that people probably have never really gave much thought to, have such massive theological implications for the author of Hebrews, and his interpretation of this passage is inspired. So he's giving the correct interpretation to the story.
Right.
Any interpretation of the story that contradicts what the author of Hebrews is saying is wrong.
Right.
So he is paying a tithe to Abram, and this is the lesser giving to the greater. And so if Abraham the patriarch is paying a tithe to Melchizedek, and Levi comes from Abraham, then Melchizedek, by extension, is greater than the Levitical
Levi.
priesthood.
That's the whole argument.
Yeah.
Because that's what he gets into. He was in Abraham's loins, and so Levi paid tithes to him too.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's the argument.
And if this is what is paid, and he talks about how the descendants of Levi receive a tithe from their brothers, because the law commands them to. The Levites didn't receive an inheritance; they didn't receive land; they received the tithe. So the people of Israel, even though they're all related to Abraham, Levi has been given that honor of serving as priest, and so they receive a tenth from the people of Israel. If this is what Levi, the Levitical priest, deserve, then Melchizedek, the priest that comes in the order of Melchizedek, he deserves what? Even greater honor, right? He doesn't just deserve a tenth; he deserves everything. He deserves your obedience, right?
Yeah. And then lastly, you have the fifth reason, or the fifth way Melchizedek points forward to Christ, is in the blessing that he confers. So this is kind of the reversal of the tithe. Like who is the one blessing? Can you go back in the Old Testament? People are fighting for their dad's blessing. Like, give me a blessing.
Right.
You know what I mean? And we're like, what in the world? What is this stuff?
Right.
Put your hand on my thigh. Get my blessing. And we're like, oh. But the whole idea is the person who blesses another, that person giving the blessing is the greater person.
Right. Right. And you see this with the Levitical priests were commanded to give a blessing. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. They were commanded to give a blessing from the Lord to the people of Israel. Melchizedek, he gives a blessing from the Lord to Abraham. He's serving as Abram's priest, the mediator between God and Abram. Melchizedek is essentially blessing the one who has the promises and praying that God would do what he has promised to Abram.
Yeah. And he says, it is beyond dispute that the inferior is blessed by the superior.
Right.
Verse 7.
He's drawing upon cultural, we don't quite get this. I mean, someone sneezes and you say, bless you.
Right.
We're not saying anything about the superiority of the person blessing the sneezer. But he's bringing out, he's bringing out the cultural aspects. I mean, in the Jewish culture, whenever the patriarch or the elder walked into the room, the younger people were supposed to stand up. Right. This is part of Jesus's question to the religious leaders in Psalm 110 when he's asking whose son is the Messiah. Well, he's David's son. Well, then how can David call him Lord?
Right.
Because that's unthinkable, right?
Right.
The father doesn't call his son Lord because the son gives honor to the father because he's the superior one. Abraham is considered superior to all of the other Jews or all the other Israelites because he's the father. Right? He's given honor. And here we have Melchizedek,
greater.
who is greater. And he shows it by he receives a tithe and he also gives a blessing.
And so then I think we understanding that now we can see easily the point that is being made, that here is Jesus who is after the order of Melchizedek, but is even greater than even Melchizedek.
Right.
And greater than Abraham and greater than everyone, and therefore he is the one who is actually deserving of most honor.
Right. That is the point of these 10 verses. Now he's going to expand upon this as he goes through chapter 7 and chapter 8. He's going to expand upon the fact that Jesus is superior, but he's got to set it up because he introduced Melchizedek in chapter 5. Then he had to make that kind of sidebar because he said, this is difficult to...
Yeah, you guys aren't ready for this.
You're not ready because you become dull of hearing. He warns them against this. He encourages them to hold on to the hope that they have in Christ, and then he comes back to it. So he circles back around to it, and so this is the introduction to everything else he's going to say about Jesus and Melchizedek. But we'll have to wait for a while to get to it.
All right, so let's try to wrap it up with some application. Because we were talking about it before, that this is one of these texts that are very heavy in explanation, and you did a great job explaining it all. So the whole point the author of Hebrews is driving at, this whole thing with the warning passage and everything, he's like, hey, I'm about to drop some Melchizedek truth on you, but you're not ready for that because you know what, you've been lazy, and then he gives this great warning, and then he says, but I think better things of you because I've seen it. Right. So now I am going to tell you about Melchizedek.
Right.
So here's my whole case.
He's not. So I think that a lot of modern day evangelicals, they think this is difficult. Melchizedek, this is hard stuff, and so they pull back.
Right.
And they say, well, you're not ready for it. Let's talk about how you can defeat your giants.
Right.
Be a Daniel. Dare to be a Daniel. But instead, he pushes forward. He's going to challenge them to go on to maturity. And I think that is an important reminder for us that the difficult things in Scripture are not an excuse for us to be lazy. For him, for the author here, he's saying that these difficult things are actually reason for you to grow in maturity, to move past a shallow faith.
And the whole rhetorical point of all of it is that, remember, if you're listening, the people, these people are thinking about leaving the Christian faith and going back to Judaism because it's easier.
Right.
The culture's changing. They're in the midst of cultural turmoil. So they have not only pressure from their Jewish relatives, they may have lost family and prestige and maybe even jobs because they're now Christians. The Roman Empire, Christianity is illegal. It's not an authorized religion. Judaism is an authorized religion. So they can, in their mind, they're grappling, okay, I've believed this about Jesus, and I've made this profession of faith, but it's costing me my life. It's cost me my family. It's cost me my friends. I'm suffering. But look, maybe they've even have seen some people go back. They've gone back to the priesthood. They go back to temple. They pay their tithes to the Levitical priesthood. They offer animal sacrifices, and they're saying they have reconciliation with God. Well, why can't I just go back? Right. And so then he says, all right, I'm going to tell you about Jesus. He is from the Melchizedekian order, and he's greater.
I've got you saying it now.
There you go. He's better than all of the priesthood of Levi.
Right.
He's going to get into a sacrifice here in a little bit, right?
Yep.
But here he says, okay, you want to talk about priest? Let's talk about priest. He is the pinnacle of where all these priests pointed, and I'm going to bring up this figure you haven't thought about too much, Melchizedek, who's actually greater than Levi, to show you that. So now showing you that, the hope is you're not going to leave.
So he's kind of arguing from the lesser to the greater. So he's arguing from Melchizedek. He's showing Melchizedek is greater than the Levitical priest. And now Jesus, who is after the order of Melchizedek, he's even greater
Yeah.
And it's just like this nuclear bomb that he's dropping on them.
So
Like even so, the scriptures, he's showing the scriptures themselves, going all the way back to Genesis 14, have been anticipating a priest that's not a Levite. Like they were already anticipating this future priest to come.
right.
There were different strands of what that looked like. Some thought that there were two messiahs. There's a king and there's a priest. Some were understanding that they're going to be, melded together. There was different ideas of what that was going to look like. But the point is that the scriptures themselves have always been anticipating something greater. You have to deal with this is why I encourage people to read their Bible from Genesis to Revelation. Don't jump around, because the chronology is important.
Yeah.
So this priest comes chronologically before the Mosaic law. So he's outside of it.
Right.
And if he's outside of it, then all of the things that are applied in the Mosaic law to the priest, they don't apply to him. And if he's blessing Abraham and Abraham's paying him a tithe, and he's acting like a priest to the father,
Right.
to the patriarch, then he is superior. He's superior not only to Abraham, but to the Levitical priest. And then as the prophets are picking up on this priest that's going to come, who's the Messiah, he's the branch, he has to, if this is what Melchizedek is, then the one who is the fulfillment of Melchizedek, he has to be greater.
Right.
He can't be less than Melchizedek. He's got to be more.
Right. So stay. Don't.
Yeah,
Go.
stay. Yeah.
Now, how do we apply this one great truth, I think, today? That's the question. People say, okay, this is a great lesson for a Jew that's thinking about apostatizing
Yeah.
and leaving Jesus behind to go back to the Levitical priesthood and become a Jew again.
Yeah.
It made me think of an interesting story. One time I was in a mall in Kansas City. Is that one of those little putt-putt places? And I was standing there waiting for Angie and the kids. And this young girl, she's like a high school girl. She's like, she like worked the place. She's like, hey, do you want to while you're waiting play putt-putt or whatever? I was like, no, but do you want to hear about Jesus? That's the stage I was in, right? So I went all in on it. She's like, but I'm a Jew.
That's quite the segue that you
Right.
have there. I like that, Jay.
I'll trade you a putt-putt for a Jesus talk. How about that?
Yeah. Okay.
And so she's like, but I'm a Jew. And I'm like, no. So just real quick, I showed her. I was like, no, you'll be a true Jew. She was like, and so she was ready to become a Christian. I was really shocked.
Okay.
But then she's like, but what happens when I go home? And that's how these people are.
Right.
Because when I go home,
Right.
and I'm like, so I don't know what happened to her, when she went home.
Yeah.
That's the battle for the Lord, I guess. But this,
Yeah,
so, but we aren't Jews, but there's still this temptation. The culture, I think, is it's changing very quickly. We've talked about it before. There's a lot of pressure on our children, even on adults, at work, with friends, with family. So many people are, if they're not outright leaving Christianity, they're adopting a worldly form of it. They're leaving their priest.
Right.
They're leaving their high priest. And I think what a text like this does is just reminds us of the superiority, how awesome Christ is, and that he is worth clinging on to.
Yeah. So we were talking about this before we recorded. This was a hard passage to get into application, because there really is only one point. And even as I was getting ready for church yesterday, and I was thinking through this, I was struggling with the fact. I think that this sermon engages the mind, but I don't know how well it affects the heart. And what I was trying to do at the end of the sermon is impress upon people, this is who Jesus is. Like, before you're going to treasure him, you have to have an accurate assessment of who he is.
Right.
You have to have a clear vision of who he is. He is the King of righteousness. He is the King of peace. His priesthood is superior because it's not based upon any legal requirements. It's based upon an indestructible life. He deserves all of the honor, and those who are in Christ receive true blessedness, more even than Abraham receives from Melchizedek. You think of the Beatitudes. Like, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. Well, where are you going to get your righteousness from? You're going to get it from the King of Righteousness, right? Jesus, even in Luke 24, at the end of Luke's gospel, he goes out to the east of Jerusalem, the King's Valley. He lifts up his hands and he blesses the disciples. He is the true and better Melchizedek. You got to have this. You got to have this vision of him, because it's the same with everything else. We hear these things over and over and over again, and often it just kind of gets lost. We need to constantly be coming back and beholding who Christ is. And as we behold him, we see that he is this great treasure worth losing everything for.
Right.
When you go home, it's worth it, because he is the true priest. He is the one that is greater than Melchizedek. He's the one that he will give you these things in a greater sense. So we just constantly need to be reminded of that.
Yeah, that's good.
And keep getting a picture of who Jesus is.
All right, good stuff. Well, this will be, I think, the last Text-Driven Tuesday for a while.
Yep.
So we'll return in August with Ecclesiastes. And we'll probably have some Free-for-All Fridays in there mixed in this summer, but we're going to slow down a little bit. So we probably won't take a full break. Yeah. We'll see how it goes. But thanks.
Too expensive to go on vacation, Jay.
Yeah.
Where am I going to go?
Yeah. Thanks for listening, and thanks, George, for going through Hebrews. We'll be back at it this fall, picking up Hebrews where you left off here. Hopefully this has been beneficial to you. It's our hope and desire. It's helped you to become more conformed to Christ as you've been going through Hebrews, learning about Christ as better. And this is an interesting lesson on Melchizedek. So if it's been beneficial, please like, subscribe, or share. Maybe write us a review and come back next time for Free for All Friday. See you then.